Wow, can anybody actually say Florence Mary Taylor Medal without stumbling on it? Because I think we've really got some tough words. But it reminds me of a story when Bill Bryson, the great American author, was out here writing his book called Down Under about Australia. And he got told all about this great American who'd come before him, Walter Burley Griffin, who designed Canberra. And he went out of the Frank Lloyd Wright School in Chicago and went back to America to research him a little while because he hadn't heard of him. I couldn't find this guy, Walter Burley Griffin, anywhere. And ironically, Florence Mary Taylor was great friends with them, and then they became lifelong enemies, the two families. But it took an American author to discover the fact he was just Walter Griffin. Australians just added the middle name for him as if it was Burley Griffin, so he couldn't find him. It's a very Australian thing. But we're delighted, Robin. And for the CLP Company Leadership guys in the room, she's agreed her first live gig is going to come and talk to the alumni because Robin really wants to invest in young people in tech. Thank you very much. I can't promise to be as crazy as Steve earlier, the wonderful energy of NEC. Thank you, sir. It was fantastic. At this time of the day, I'm just riding on cough medicine and Red Bull, so we'll see how we get through the rest of the afternoon to get through. To do so in our closing session is a great honour to call firstly on stage our recipients and then our presenter. But please make welcome to the stage Dr. Stephen Kennedy, the Secretary of the Treasury in Canberra, the real big one. Malcolm Turnbull, the 29th Prime Minister of Australia, and Lucy Turnbull Hughes, the founding Commissioner of the Greater Sydney Commission. And he's here, we found him. And to present award on our behalf, please make welcome one of our patrons, Dr. Kerry Schott, AO.
Welcome everyone. I'm a patron of the Western Sydney Leadership Dialogue, and in that role it's a great pleasure of mine to officiate at today's award ceremony. And in presenting the prize, me and my fellow patrons thought it appropriate to honour the contribution towards the urban development and redevelopment of Greater Western Sydney. And we are all big fans of Western Sydney, and the region has directly benefited from the collaboration, formal and informal, as you might imagine, between the then 29th Prime Minister of Australia, the founding chair of the Greater Sydney Commission, and the former head of the Commonwealth Cities Unit. The core of this collaboration lies in the infrastructure projects of economic significance, such as the Western Sydney International Airport, associated roads package that goes with it, the associated rail that's coming with it, the development of the Westmead Biomedical Research Hub, to name but a few. It also resonates in governance reforms, investment flows, employment density, new academic residents, and a fundamental shift in the economic and social fabric of the region, soon to be home to 4 million Australians. Malcolm Turnbull, Lucy Hughes Turnbull, and Stephen Kennedy formally, as I've said, formally and informally worked together to give substance and a bit of celebrity to the development of this massive region we know as Greater Western Sydney. The development of the cow pastures of the Western Parkland City, the auspices of the Western Sydney City Deal, the regeneration of the Central River City via the primacy of Parramatta Westmead at its core, are all testimony to this partnership. And it's, of course, all happened very quickly, but getting it started was not easy. We saw through the collaboration of federal and state governments the genuine transformation in aspiration of the growing population, and we've seen genuine cities shaping and emerging that are on a global scale. If you think back a decade, all of that seems a long way away, and it was Malcolm bravely staring down his now opposition colleagues from within his own political ranks, and with Stephen Kennedy's help, recalibrating Canberra's attention towards real impact in urban and suburban Australia. This was something very new for the Coalition and a relatively recent development in Canberra and not seen since the 70s in the Whitlam government, frankly. Lucy Hughes Turnbull led the fledgling Greater Sydney Commission crusade to articulate the three cities model, which we're all now very familiar with, dealing with metropolitan Sydney with specific emphasis on the middle ring of the central river city and its spine between Westmead, Parramatta and Olympic Park. The dialogue patrons and executive believe it's appropriate to honour these three individuals and the collective effort of the three. In keeping with our role as fierce advocates, like Chris, I'm having trouble with words today, in keeping with our role as fierce advocates for Greater West, it's a great privilege to be giving an award to Malcolm and Lucy and Stephen today. Thank you.
I'm not squeezing too close. You don't want to kill my patron. Thank you, sir. I've got to tell you, talk about a powerhouse group of urbanists on the one stage at the one time. I should also recognise in Kerry's role as the founding chair of the Moorebank Intermodal Company, the other piece of federal infrastructure in Western Sydney that is often overlooked for the shiny airport, and also a former director of NBN, Infrastructure Australia, and Infrastructure New South Wales, and the New South Wales Treasury, etc., etc., etc. Energy Security Board. She knows a thing or two about infrastructure herself. Firstly, maybe I'd start with Stephen. Stephen, I know, and Lucy was very pains to point out to me that technically she had nothing to do with the city deal because she was conflicted from role at GSC. However, as an observer of this great partnership, what did you see? Sitting the cities unit, you've now ascended to the head of Treasury, so it didn't hurt the career cities. Not bad from a former psych nurse, is he? He's now running Treasury. Australia's a great place. It's perfect training for Treasury, yes. So this is a truly unique partnership, these two in urbanism, and Western Sydney is probably in the greatest benefit of that partnership. But what did you notice along the way, sort of being as part of that duo, dynamic duo?
Thank you, Chris. Firstly, let me say a great honour to be here with Malcolm and Lucy, and lovely to see you. As an unelected official, honestly, I feel my contribution was small, and particularly with former PM Turnbull. But I'll start with Lucy, actually. What you really need, in public policies, what you really need is a plan, and a really good plan, and some sort of vision. And what really underpinned, or what excited me, and what I regard as sort of really a highlight in my professional experience, was the Three Cities plan. It is really visionary to change the nature of the way a larger and larger city will work, and then improve the amenity and life and well-being for those people who live now and will live in the West. And so the thing that struck me at the very outset with Lucy, apart from her intelligence and passion and drive, was this vision that you could buy into and that you could then structure something around. And of course, with Malcolm as Prime Minister, who was willing to invest. And it was true that we did work separately. I worked with Jeff Roberts, and it was great to see Lindy Dietz here before. She was one of the 8 councils, and we really worked together, I thought, really well. It was wonderful for me to turn up at the first meeting and let everybody know that I was from the Commonwealth and I really didn't know much at all about planning or anything that I was about to be involved in, but I was there to contribute, and my Prime Minister was very interested in investing in this region.
You were bringing the cash, Stephen. I'm sure they were happy to have you there.
And the next key bit, and it is a wonderful legacy by Malcolm, was the way the airport would then be developed. There were many decisions to be taken in government about how that airport would come about. I mean, in my view, Malcolm took exactly the right decisions for it to be developed in the way it's being developed, because that's the way to allow it to be integrated with state and local government and to get it right from the very outset. Many of you would know this, but there were many other options that could have been taken. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was exactly the right decision. It took leadership, and so I drew great inspiration, frankly, from working with both of them because of the leadership and their passion for the whole city, but particularly for the development of Western Sydney.
Lucy, to you, I think you and Malcolm were both intertwined with yours was the 3-city model and Malcolm was the 30-minute city model, and the two came together. Were you frustrated that people didn't get the fact that the 30-minute city... There's my place, thank you. That people didn't get the fact that it was 30 minutes from one of the 3 cities. Was it the classic Sydney thinking to go, they mean 30 minutes from Martin Place, which was just never cottoned onto? Was it? How hard was that to try and drive home to people?
Well, yes, I mean, that you can, some people did sort of, make a bit of fun of, would be a nice way of putting it, the fact that nobody would ever get from Palm Beach to the Shire in 30 minutes. That wasn't the idea at all. The idea underpinning the 30-minute city, and a lot of people would like it to be a 20-minute city, and we should be directing ourselves to that. Certainly Parramatta will be 20 minutes from the Sydney CBD when the metro's up and running, is to actually make jobs, job choices, schools, hospitals available within 30 minutes, local centres and strategic centres. And if we've learnt one thing from the pandemic, it's the extraordinary significance under-acknowledged previously of these local centres when so you don't have to go into a huge big city centre, be it Parramatta CBD or be it Sydney CBD, to actually lead a rich and interesting life.
Yeah. Malcolm, Kerry spoke before of the inbuilt opposition, somewhat you focused on. Traditionally the coalition had seen federal government as a bit of a rural development agency, and the states were responsible for cities, except the fact that 80% of our economy comes out of the cities. Do you think, and notwithstanding the travails since, do you think you have a legacy now that the conservative side of politics will always embrace urban or maybe at least just suburban development, or is it going to be in waves again and it needs another commitment to really embed that theory?
If my party, the Liberal Party, wants to ever get back into government federally, they're going to have to, let's be frank. The problem we faced, and Stephen touched on this, was that historically the Department of Infrastructure was seen by the National Party as their bailiwick for putting money almost entirely in the form of grants into regional infrastructure, and they were allergic to cities. They were really allergic to mass transit, putting any federal money into mass transit. And look, there were arguments that the Liberals, the Liberals of the John Howard era had exactly the same view, by the way. And they also, didn't want to own anything. In fact, I remember during the Howard government, I tried to argue the case in one of John's cabinets that we should be investing in infrastructure rather than just showering it with grants. And Stephen remembers the discussions we used to have about this, and have to say he did a phenomenal job making all these brilliant ideas. I use that term tongue-in-cheek almost, but make them work. But I remember one of the ministers, National Party ministers, said, Malcolm, the problem is if we invest in economic infrastructure, then we've got to appoint directors, then we'll be responsible. Isn't it better just to kick the money out the door? And I hadn't been in politics that long. I was coming from a business background. This was mind-blowing. And so the big changes that we were looking at, and this is what Kerry Schott was talking about earlier, and Kerry I mean, it'd be very hard to find a greater servant of the public than Kerry through so many roles. And she has, for those interested in what's wrong at the moment, with energy, Kerry has forgotten more about energy than just about anyone I know is ever likely to learn in a lifetime. But the problem was they didn't want to do cities, they didn't want to do transit, and they didn't want to invest in anything. And I wanted to do all three. But the good thing is when you're Prime Minister, you can. So that was basically what came about. So one of the first things I did was invest in light rail in the Gold Coast. Obviously, we put money into the rail here and many other places. And of course, we decided to build the airport ourselves. And that was, we're just talking to Matthew Knott from the Herald about this earlier, but I mean, as Stephen will remember, the original deal for the Western Sydney Airport was utterly nuts. I mean, it's literally crazy. When Sydney Airport at Mascot had been sold under the Howard government, they had a clause in the sale agreement that said that the purchaser of Sydney Airport and Mascot had a first and last right of refusal to build the Western Sydney Airport. Which meant that you had essentially the one group that had the greatest vested interest in it not being built having a lock on whether it was going to be built. And if they were going to do it, it'd be built very slowly. So in order to induce them to build it, my distinguished predecessor was about to give them a gigantic, basically free loan to build it incredibly slowly. The only way, long story, boring story about the law, we found a way through it, and the way through it was to build it ourselves. Now, this was kind of heresy, but nonetheless, that's what's going to happen, and Sydney will end up having an airport in Western Sydney, which will provide competition to the one in Eastern Sydney. Isn't that what you think? That's what Party of Free Enterprise would be all about. So anyway, all of those things needed to be sorted out, and they needed to be coordinated, and that's where, and I owe a great debt to Lucy for this, this is where the big idea for the city deals came about, and the nice thing is it's a reform, I think, that's worked, Stephen, and will endure under the Labor government. So I think it was a good collaboration. And
that's segue, Kerry. Your career has been in many ways linked to both then Prime Minister Turnbull and now Prime Minister Albanese. You've worked very closely with both of them, and you've been their infrastructure go-to person, along with Rod Eddington and Mike Murdoch. The three of you had this sort of role. The new Prime Minister hasn't enunciated a cities minister, which I was a little worried about. But do you think that impetus is still there? Should we have no concern? Is that just a bit of irrelevant nomenclature? And that we'll continue to see a Canberra fully invested in urban infrastructure, particularly in Western Sydney?
Oh, I think so, Chris. I can't imagine that the policy absolutely would not continue, and it will continue with the three cities policy and further development of transport, and also, of course, medical facilities, which we're starting to see. So, yes.
Stephen, the Western Sydney city deal, I still want one for the Central River City, but in 50 years' time I might get there. I keep pushing for it. You'd inherited, well, the ones before was, with due respect, a stadium in Townsville, a hospital in Tasmania. But Western Sydney City deal was the first at scale, right? So I'm a bit disparaging, there's too many Western Sydney deals. But the first at scale, 8 councils, a fully integrated UK-style city deal. They're interesting, the UK never did one for East London, which is fascinating as a massive urban transformation, but outside that. How complex was that? Running around behind it, how much did it help to have the personal intervention of a Prime Minister or a chair here? Could the bureaucrats have ever got it together, or is that when you absolutely need that power of the political office to make it happen?
I just have to start by answering your disparaging comments about the Launceston and Townsville City deals, which are, in all seriousness...
Call it Western Sydney exceptionalism, what can I say?
In all seriousness, there is great value in getting the 3 levels of government, honestly, just to sit down and work together, because they are all pouring a lot of money, and they all have different capabilities into any area. And I know it sounds very simple, but just bringing them together around, as I spoke about earlier, some form of a plan with a little bit of accountability, annual reports, and then bringing the heft of the Prime Minister to say this is something I really care about. Even in those jurisdictions, it was amazing how you could shift things in the delivery of services. But the big thing about the Western Sydney City deal was the scale and the fact that it's really a genuine contributor to national productivity. I mean, if this city works well and Western Sydney works well, productivity in Australia is higher, and it directly, as I said earlier, improves the well-being of literally millions of Australians. In terms of bringing it together, we had a great platform, and I mentioned earlier Lucy's colleague, Jeff Roberts. We had a great platform that had already been set up through the Commission and great collaboration that was going on. Now, that's not to say that everyone was happy that each other was turning up. To be really frank with you, the initial engagements with the state government, I wasn't always clear, Lucy, that I was that enthusiastic about me turning up with my enthusiasms. But having said that, later on I developed these fabulous relationships with people like Tim Reardon, for example, who went on to head premiers, and a range of really high quality, Sarah Hill, who I later met through the Commission, high quality New South Wales public servants. But what I really want to call out is the coming together of the 8 councils. That was really fantastic. I mean, I learned a lot by working with my state colleagues, but perhaps even more by working with those 8 councils. And it was a little easier in some ways coming from the Commonwealth, because you were just a bit of a step apart from that tension that you see arising between state and local government constantly. Whose rights, who's doing this? But I could just learn a lot about what was happening on the ground from those people, and they were all willing to collaborate. There were a few little stoushes. I was great to see Lindy Dice up here on the stage earlier. There were, I've kind of walked headlong into, what were probably decade-old fights between different local government areas, but they were all genuinely interested in the outcomes for Western Sydney, and that's what made it work.
I think I still remember being out there in the blistering heat in Penrith the day that Gladys and Malcolm signed off, and the mayors. And I remember even up to the night before, it was almost off, and one particular mayor was playing silly buggers, but to pull it off was quite the achievement.
That's just the one you know about.
He's a very independent mayor. Malcolm, looking back now and watched it since, would you have done anything differently in the city deal? Would you have put Blacktown in? That's my bugbear. Had they not hated the airport, would Blacktown have been in the Western City deal? Well,
ideally it would have. I mean, it was up really up to that local government area. I don't think we would have done a lot differently. I mean, Lucy would have the better critique of it. What do you think could have been improved with the benefit of hindsight, Luce?
Well, I think in terms of, my own view is that Blacktown should have been in it, and I'm not sure, because I was conflicted out. The current Prime Minister conflicted me out, so I was, on the other side of the Chinese wall. I think it would have made a lot more sense to put Blacktown in there, to be honest with you.
How do Chinese walls work at the lodge?
Hey, well, you have to respect them. But what I think the other thing I think is really important is I don't think it would have made a difference, but just in terms of the esteem of the largest local government area in Australia would have been great to have, because Blacktown to me is one of the most fascinating parts of Sydney, and the previous panel member was talking about the diversity there. I mean, it is next level, and anybody who hasn't been to Blacktown City Centre really should get out there and go. But the other thing I think, and I did actually mention this to Malcolm as a private citizen, I really wanted the railway line to continue to Glenfield so that there could be a better rail link. So Campbelltown's on the Sydney Airport link, so if you could put both airports on the link that takes you to Sydney Airport, that would have been a home run, but I'm sure they can get there.
I think they're about to announce to Leppington, so we're inching toward Glenfield. Lucy, with your championing of, and you and I share a view that how to redesign Hospital Road and Westmead, etc. But your championing of Parramatta, I think really was a deal to change the deal significantly. How hard was that to sort of recalibrate Sydney's thinking that this is the core, that Western Sydney can be the solution to Sydney, not its problem, that all of my growing up was ever the problems of Western Sydney? How hard to absolutely change that thinking?
Well, I mean, the reason that we came up with the Parramatta, what we called the Place Infrastructure Compact, was that I was asked to chair, as my initial role on the Greater Sydney Commission, the Parramatta Olympic Park Coordination Committee. You would come to a meeting, there would be like, at least sometimes there were 60 people around the table, whether they were running the stadium here, Parramatta Council, like name the government agency, they would all be here. There were so many within state government, Premier's Department was represented, planning, like there were so many people. And there were so many strands that needed to be pulled together, and often aren't pulled together. So we decided to kind of formalise that into a place compact called GPOP, which we launched at the Bradfield Lecture, I think, in 2016. Yep. And that was a really exciting moment to actually spark an idea that you could actually conceptualise the area from the Olympic Park all the way to Westmead, and you could actually argue it should go a bit further to Seven Hills, but to imagine that as the central river city was just like amazing. And I always love coming back here because I think this is the most fabulous part, one of the most fabulous parts of Sydney.
Malcolm, just in closing, it's been an act of political bravery on urbanism. As I said, you rewrote the rules for the coalition within. Do you think that there is so much more to do? Is it solely a matter of the amount of money that a federal government can place and bring heft behind it? Do you genuinely believe that things like the City Deal can forever change the collaborative governance model? How much more needs to be done to embed that so it's not just fashion and we go back to the bad old days?
Well, I think the answer is you've got to, practice makes perfect, or at least practice makes better. So you've got to keep at it. There is a real problem, and Stephen and Kerry, as public servants, have better understanding of this, I think. But there is a real problem with the de-skilling of the public service, this is particularly a problem, I think, in Canberra with the cult of consultancies. I apologise to all consultants here, but it is, it's one of the reasons I set up that inquiry that David Thodey, chaired, many of whose recommendations are ignored by my successor, I regret to say, but it is a real issue. And so if you have a Department of Infrastructure in Canberra that is just used to writing cheques and don't do what Stephen did, and with humility turn up and say, look, I don't really know a lot about planning, but I'm here, I've not just money bags, I'm here to learn, and you start getting the Commonwealth public service involved in these issues and not just outsourcing it to consultants, then you end up with better policy outcomes from your public service departments, and you also make a career in the public service more interesting, by the way. So you'll actually get more, you get more people to join, and you'll get more good people to stay. So I think the important thing is collaboration. It is, and we're here in Western Sydney. This is the biggest, of the city deals by far. Honestly, I remember one of the last things I did was set up a similar deal in Tennant Creek, which is not exactly a gigantic metropolis, but obviously has very different, very distinct issues, but it was the same problem. A whole lot of agencies, levels of government, all with good intentions, all passing like ships in the night. And the critical thing, as Stephen was saying, is to get everybody round the table and say, okay, what is it we all want to achieve? Work out, and you'll generally find everyone wants to achieve more or less the same thing. The biggest difference in what people's goals are is that you'll find that there is a distinction between all the parties around the table in the Commonwealth because all the other parties around the table will want the Commonwealth to pick up the tab for the lot. So you've just got, that's the one thing that's the one uniting factor with everybody other than the Commonwealth Government. So the critical thing is to make sure the other players have got skin in the game, which is why, part of the city deal was that the north-south rail that Luce was talking about earlier and, was saying quite rightly it should keep going past the airport. That's why we agreed that was going to be half for the state and half for the Commonwealth. It wasn't just being, the Commonwealth saying, oh, we don't want to spend any more than that. It was because you've got to get everybody having skin in the game and having a commitment and essentially being joint owners. Whether it's the airport or other pieces of economic infrastructure, it's important for the Commonwealth to actually learn the skills, and this takes time, of investing in and helping manage economic infrastructure and not just being a grantor of grants.
So, be like the guy turning up to the party who brings the beer. The Commonwealth was always welcome, but was not much listened to once the beer had been drunk, and a significant change. Look, in closing, it is my singular honour to be part of having spent a large chunk of my career punching away for the Golden West, but no amount of policy papers, interviews, press releases, political stunts, you name it, gets anywhere until you have the professionalism of a public service who can drive that and the power of the political arm who can inspire it. And when the history is written of Western Sydney, regardless of who writes it, I'll write my own version, I'll look really good in that, but regardless how it's written, Malcolm and Lucy Turnbull will be very much at the core of that, of changing the very essential thinking of what Western Sydney can be. And there is a certain irony. I once said to Mike Baird and Rob Stokes, a couple of Northern Beaches waxheads get Western Sydney better than most people I know, and a couple of Eastern Suburbs blue bloods really brought it home. And it is, I think, to our eternal benefit that this collaboration, this Turnbull partnership, brought the federal government fully into Western Sydney with not only the beer, but with the drive and the governance reforms and hopefully the sustainable reform that will make it forever a feature of, you can't have I think Gough Whitlam once said, you can't be serious about national government if you ignore the cities. It's not just there to run the bush. Would you please join me in thanking the recipients of the 2022 Collaboration Patrons Prize, Stephen Kennedy, Malcolm Turnbull and Lucy Turnbull, and thank my patron Kerry Schott as well. Thank you all.